All right, Brian, in the final segment of today's show, we are going to be previewing the SEC Part 3 of the Irish Breakdown podcast brought to you by FanDuel. Brian, this is going to an interesting conference to break down. And I know you and I were talking back and forth before the show about some of the challenges that we came into. And some of that is because this conference is a little bit wide open, especially up at the top for who's going to take home the conference championship at the end of the season. I know FanDuel has certain odds and how they think that the season is going to end up for them. But overall, this was a tough conference to break down, man.
It does. I mean, you look at like you said, the FanDuel odds. Obviously, Texas is the preseason top team in the SEC. Almost everybody thinks it. I still don't understand how that's the case when you watch Georgia just beat them twice, including with their backup quarterback. But I get it. Alabama, Georgia coming in too slight. I mean, it's close. It's plus 290 to plus 300. It's very close. Alabama third, LSU fourth. That's all to be expected. A&M fifth and sixth. That's where it gets a little bit like, okay, no South Carolina on there. Like, okay, that's interesting. No Ole Miss on there. Okay, that's interesting. So it just shows that the depth of this league. That when you look at those betting odds, obviously you see they have 3-4 teams that are good, that get a lot of good love when it comes to winning a championship, national championship, not just the conference championship, but a national championship. I think it's Texas, Georgia, Alabama, and LSU are the 4 teams that are in the top 10 as far as best odds to win a championship. Correct? I believe is all 4 of those teams are in there. So I think this shows the competitiveness of this league. There is no Alabama that's just head and shoulders above everybody else. Or back when it was kind of like Alabama, LSU, and Georgia were just kind of better than everybody else. I think there's a lot of depth in this league. Part of it is the top isn't as strong as it used to be. But I think also what's happened with the portal is everybody keeps talking about how the portal has hurt the SEC. And I say, well, kind of. It's hurt the top teams in the SEC. I think it's helped the bottom teams in the SEC. Because now they can start getting some of these players that are, it's like Georgia had the Dumas Johnson kid that left Georgia. He went to Kentucky. And so I think that's helping the league as well is look, the transfer portal helped Missouri get one of the best young pass rushers in the country, and Damon Wilson from Ohio State, or from Georgia. So yeah, it hurt Georgia, but he went to another SEC team. So I think overall it's helped create some parity in the league, not just in college football. And it's like there's this perception that all these portal guys are leaving the SEC and going to other leagues. Well, you don't think Texas A&M is a better football team because of the transfer portal? There's kids coming into the transfer to the SEC as well. Isaiah Horton going to Alabama, the receiver from Miami, right? That helps them a ton. Georgia goes to the Big Ten and gets Zechariah Branch. They get another SEC lineman. Noah Thomas leaves Texas A&M. He goes to another SEC team and going to Georgia. So we talked a lot about the need for, when we did our Texas A&M preview of Des Ricks and Julian Humphrey, 2 stud corners that have transferred in that need to be good. Well, where'd they transfer in from? Alabama and Georgia. So I think it's dispersed some of the talent in the league, not just 2 other teams. And then there's players leaving the other leagues and coming to play in the SEC. And Diego Pavia, Vanderbilt's not as good as they were last year, if not for the transfer portal. Getting Diego Pavia and Eli Stowers are 2 huge pickups for Vanderbilt last year that helped them have the success that they had. So I think those things all factor into it, and plays a role into why Notre Dame is, why these teams, why there's so much parity, I should say, in the SEC this year. But it's also, I think sometimes it's not just the top team coming down. I think it's also elevation from some of the other teams in the league.
Oh, yeah. Look at this graphic compared to what FanDuel had some of the ACC odds at yesterday. Very rarely do you see a gap of plus 10 odds between who may win the conference and who may be in second place. For example, yesterday when we talked about the ACC, Clemson is plus 110 odds and favorite to win the ACC. Next closest team is Miami at plus 370. The next closest team after that is Louisville at plus 750. We're talking about, you don't get above 600 until you get into the 5th deep team in the SEC. I think that speaks to the depth of the league, to your point, Brian. So I think that's really, really interesting to see where FanDuel has some of these odd lines.
I agree. So that's what FanDuel has. Now, Trevor, you and I get to tell a little bit of of what we have. So we'll do the same thing we did yesterday. We'll start. I'll give a group of teams, and then you'll give your group of teams. Today we're going to go 5-5-4-2, since there's 16 teams, not 17 teams, like the ACC, and we'll start off. I'll give my 12 to 16, 16 to 12. My team in the worst team in the SEC this year is going to be Kentucky. I think it's certainly possible, Trevor, when you look at their schedule and you look at kind of what they lost and just some of the issues and what they're counting on. I think it's certainly possible that Kentucky could maybe not win a game in the SEC this year. And that's saying a lot, but here's their SEC slate. Ole Miss at home, at South Carolina, at Georgia, home against Texas, home against Tennessee, at Auburn, home against Florida, at Vanderbilt. That's a brutal SEC schedule for anybody, much less a team coming off a 4-8 season. Now, this is also the same team that went out and beat Ole Miss on the road last year, and almost beat Georgia. So there's always a puncher's chance. But I look at this depth chart, I look at this roster, and there's some issues. I don't have a lot of faith in Zach Calzada at quarterback. I think Kentucky's going to have a really rough year this year. My next team in the SEC is Vanderbilt. Last year was a great story, Trev, and loved what we saw, and it was fun, and loved Clark Lee and all that. But I just look at Vanderbilt this year, and I don't know that they can repeat that magic for a host of reasons. I think their schedule this year is much tougher than it was last year, and they've got some of the teams that they were able to have some success against last year. They're going to have a tougher time with this year, and you look at their results last year. They lost to Missouri, they lost to Texas, they lost to South Carolina, lost to LSU, lost to Tennessee. Their in-conference wins were over Auburn, who wasn't very good last year, Kentucky, who wasn't very good last year. They had to play Kentucky at Kentucky. They get them at home this year. And then they beat Alabama in let's be honest, a bit of a fluky game. They were still a 3-win team in their league last year. Like, this isn't a team that was dominant in their league. They went 3-5 in their league last year, which gets them kind of near the bottom. And I think that they're going to be kind of close to that this year. And then you look at their 25 schedule, a little bit tougher. They play at South Carolina, at Alabama, home against LSU, home against Missouri, at Texas. That's their first 5 conference games. Then they're home against Auburn, home against Kentucky, and at Tennessee. That's a much tougher schedule this year than it was last year, which was challenging, but it's just a tougher schedule. And so I think people they know this team now. They know Diego Pavia. And I think when you look at how Vanderbilt struggled down the stretch last year, they started off well. They started the season off 5-2, 6-3, and then lost their last 3 games. I think that's more indicative of who this team is going to be than what they were last year. They will battle. That's the one thing I know about this team. They will battle, but I just don't know that they're going to win a lot of those games. Next for me is Mississippi State Bulldogs. Trev, I'm going to be honest with you. I kind of like some of the things that Jeff Lebby's doing with this football team at Mississippi State. I think their schedule is not the easiest schedule, and I think that's going to be something that's going to keep them from making as big of a jump as I think they're maybe capable of doing. But I like some of the things that they've done. I like some of the guys they've picked up from the transfer portal. I think that Jeff Lebby laid a solid foundation last year, and what he's trying to build. I think this is a team that has got a chance to be a little bit better this year. I'm not saying they're going to compete to get in the top of the league. I just think they're going to be a little bit better this year. Quarterback's going to be a big question. They got Blake Shapen from Baylor last year. He's projected to be started. They got Luke Kromenhoek from Florida State, who I think is a very talented player. So they got Fluff Bothwell in at running back, who's a talented player, who came in from South Alabama. I believe he was a 1,000-yard rusher last year at South Alabama. He's a talented runner. He could potentially be one of the better running backs in the league coming in this season. So I think he's got actually he was under 1,000, but he was 834 yards on only 112 carries last year, 7.4 per carry, 13 touchdowns last year as a true freshman at South Alabama. He's a talented player. They had some portal losses. Obviously, they're going to have to overcome, but I don't know what it is, Trev. I just look at this team and some of the pickups they made and just how they competed last year, and I think Mississippi State's got a shot to be maybe a tad better, but they're another team that's got an absolutely brutal schedule this season, and then non-conference they got to play Arizona State, but so they're going to be better. I don't know that the record will reflect it a ton. Number 13 on my list is the Missouri Tigers. Look, I know that Missouri's getting a lot of love. I just don't see it with this team, Trev. And part of it comes down to I am not a big Bo Pribula fan, and I'm not sold on him being that guy. I think their offensive line could be pretty good if Johnny Williams can make a quick transition to left tackle. I do worry a little bit about their tackles, who are both transfer guys. But I look at this team last year, and I see a team that struggled offensively last year with Theo Weiss and Luther Burden, and you wonder what they're going to do this year without those guys. And I think there's some issues. I think they have some good talent, but they don't have the talent they had a couple years ago, in my opinion. And then you look at their schedule, and one of the things that benefited Missouri last year is I think that they had a favorable schedule. I think their schedule's still a little bit more favorable than it's like, why does Missouri get kind of that break? But it's still a little tougher slate this year because of some of the road games they have. They get South Carolina at home and Alabama at home, Texas A&M at home. You almost kind of would rather those games be on the road, because I think all those teams are capable of beating Missouri at Missouri. Then they've also got at Auburn, at Vanderbilt, at Oklahoma, at Arkansas. The only game that I look at and say that's a chalked up win is their home game against Mississippi State. So part of it is just I think their schedule is going to be is a little bit more challenging this season than maybe it has in recent years. And then number 12 for me is the Arkansas Razorbacks. This is a team that I have a hard time evaluating because there's some aspects of it I like. I think their offensive line and defensive line have a chance to be pretty good. Taylor Green was very productive last year, but they lost a big chunk of their receiving core. Their secondary is a major question mark. And then you look at the schedule, Trevor, and they didn't do any favors for Arkansas this season schedule-wise. They have to play at Ole Miss. That not even a little. They have to play at Ole Miss, at Tennessee, at LSU, at Texas. Their home games in conference are A&M, Auburn, Mississippi State, and Missouri. And oh, by the way, they also in their non-conference play at Memphis and home against Notre Dame. So give Arkansas credit. They didn't duck anybody in the like. They're not an SEC team you can point to and say, well, they don't play anybody. They play a really good G5 team in Memphis, and then obviously play the defending national runners-up. So I don't think that they knew that Notre Dame was going to be that when they scheduled them back in the 2000 teens, but that's still a very tough schedule for Arkansas. So I would not have Arkansas and Missouri this low if we were doing a power ranking of just the quality of the teams. They'd both be near the top 10 for me, but when you factor in the schedule, that's why I have those two teams as low as I do.
When I started diving into my list, it was interesting to see how much I wanted to factor in the chaos from the league last year, because there's so many teams that are kind of in the bottom of my list that just for whatever reason snuck away with a big win last year, outside of the final team that I have ranked, the lowest team that I have ranked in mine, which is the Mississippi State Bulldogs. I do like their head coach. I do. Yeah, I like what Jeff Lebby's doing. He's going into year 2. But last season, Mississippi State went 0-8 in conference, and not a single loss was by single digits. I mean, you go through and you look at what they lost in the portal. They had 38 outgoing transfers. They had 34 incoming transfers. And, basically a complete roster overhaul is going to be interesting to see how Jeff Lebby handles that in his second year at the helm. I do agree, Brian, that I like some of the pieces of talent that they brought in, but I think they may be a year away from kind of like reaping some of the benefits of those. But would it surprise me if they didn't end up as the 16th ranked team? No, because I think it would be hard. It would be really disheartening to watch Jeff Lebby in back-to-back seasons finish in the SEC basically combined 0-16. But right now, I don't love their in-conference schedule. I mean, Tennessee, Texas A&M, Florida, Texas, at Arkansas, Georgia, at Missouri. Home against Ole Miss is also not that great. And when one of your out-of-conference championship games is against the Big 12 champions from last year that does return a host of talent, Mississippi State's going to have it rough. You mentioned that Van Buren, he took over as a starter last season. He has since transferred out. I hope that Blake Shapen can stay healthy, because that's the reason why Van Buren took over last season. It was like I think it was like a similar injury to what like Riley Leonard had, just like more severe. It was season ending. It required surgery. So hopefully he can stay healthy. I like some of the pieces, but as of right now, I look at their schedule combined with how much roster turnover they had. I have them as my number 16 team in the SEC. My number 15 team, the Kentucky Wildcats. They're another team. They suffered a lot from the transfer portal. They had 31 outgoing transfers. They were 1-7 last season in conference. But they're a team that historically, the reason why I don't have them dead last is just consistent with what they've done in previous seasons. They just get that one win that it's like, not really sure how Kentucky won that game. 2024, they beat Ole Miss. In 2023, they beat a ranked Florida team at the time. In 2022, I think they beat Florida again in the start of the season on the road in the Swamp, and Florida was ranked number 12 in the country. And so I think that they have another one of those wins in them, and I think it's just for the simple fact that the team may get overlooked. I think some of the drama with their head coach and Mark Stoops is still lingering with some of the few remaining players that they do have on that roster, because I know he really was trying to gun for the Alabama job and then didn't get it. And so there's a whole lot going on with them from the top down. And then on top of all of that, I don't love what their schedule is. I mean, they're in conference schedule. They're at South Carolina. They're at Georgia. They host Texas. They're at Auburn. They host Florida. So their in conference schedule is not doing them any favors. And then, of course, out of conference, they get Louisville, who absolutely decimated them last year. It's another hard out of conference opponent. My number 14 team is Missouri. And Brian, you and I could not see this more similarly. They took a step back last season compared to what they did in 2023, and that was even when they had Brady Cook and Luther Burden. I don't have a whole lot of confidence in Bo Pribula. I've said this to you before. I think I've said it on the show. The Bo Pribula situation, it really reminds me of the Blake Bell situation at Oklahoma from 2012 to 2013. Blake Bell was kind of their big red zone quarterback that they would use in short yardage and goal line situations. And he had 11 and 12 rushing touchdowns in back-to-back seasons in 2011 and 2012. Then he took over as the full-time starter in 2013, and it didn't pan out as well. And then they made him a tight end. Bo Pribula, that situation is eerily similar. So that combined with what their in-conference schedule is, I mean, Missouri gets South Carolina, they get Alabama, they're on the road against Auburn, they get Texas A&M, they're on the road against Arkansas, and they're also on the road against Oklahoma. I think it's going to be a tough road for Missouri and quarterback play. To your point earlier, Brian, when you have a good quarterback in the SEC and when you get good quarterback play in the SEC, that tends to bode well for your program as a whole. I just don't know if Missouri is going to have that this fall. My number 13 team is Vanderbilt. And again, another team that we see very similar. They finished last season 3-5 in conference, but I think that win over Alabama really clouded people's vision of what Vanderbilt actually was. They still finished the season 6-6, and they were still in the conference under 500. I think people kind of have this misguided view of what Diego Pavia was. Brian, to your point, once they got film on him, he stopped performing as well. I mean, in his final games against Texas, Auburn, South Carolina, LSU, and Tennessee, he didn't have a completion percentage above 55%. He started to struggle. And for as good of a runner that he was, I mean, some weeks he got relatively shut down. I mean, against Auburn on the road, He had 12 carries for 26 yards. And as a passer, he went 9 of 22. Now, he had two passing touchdowns, didn't turn the ball over, but on his season as a whole, he was a 59.4% passer. I love Clark Lee, and I wish that Vanderbilt wasn't this low on my list because I really like Clark Lee. But now it's to your point that you brought up earlier about Vandy. They're not going to sneak up on anybody this year. And honestly, they stopped sneaking up on people last year. They are going to continue to battle. And even in their losses last year, they never really got completely blown out. But we are still talking about a team that in week 3 last year, they lost to Georgia State. And so I'm not that high on Vanderbilt. I have them as my 13th ranked team in the conference. And then coming in at number 12, I have Arkansas. They went 3-5 last season. I see them having a very similar in-conference season this year. They're good for kind of consistent with a lot of the other teams in the SEC. They're good for one of those, how did they win that game type of game last year? Last year it was Tennessee. This year I think it could be another team that they have on their schedule. I'm very interested to see what Taylen Green does this year without Andrew Armstrong, Isaac Tesla, Isaiah Sategna, and Luke Hask. That is going to be really interesting to see what he does. Is he the type of quarterback that can put a team on his back and say, hey, I got this, or not? Mm-hmm. They also lost one of their starting running backs who also happened to be one of their top pass catchers last year. So I'm in line with you. I like their offense and defense, and that's a good foundation to any team. But it's going to come down to if Taylon Green can kind of be that guy in this offense for them, because that's going to be kind of what they need him to be this year. I like some of their talent. I think isn't Arkansas the team that picked up that Charlotte wide receiver, Omega Blake, on the all-name team?
Good player. I mean, the name is cool, but he's a good football player. You watch the film, he's a good football player. And he fits. I mean, he's a guy that can stretch the field and do some of the things that Taylon Green is good at. And also, this is going to be Taylon Green's second year in the system, which is going to help as well. Second year knowing the team, knowing his teammates, and them knowing him as well.
Yep.
Before we move on to the next section, I got to say, too, you talk about Diego Pavia, and somebody in the chat, Jason Smith, mentioned this as well. I don't think he did himself any favors with how he kind of publicly talks either.
No.
And not just in like the media, but other SEC players are going to watch that SEC Any Given Saturday show. And he puts a big bullseye on his chest. And that was great when nobody really knew what they were about. But as you pointed out, once people had some film on him, it looked a whole lot different. And he just, like he has become very unlikable to me this offseason. Now, maybe he's always been this way. I didn't pay attention to him early last year because I didn't care, and watched him on the field. He's a scrappy player, gritty player, and all that. I enjoy watching him play, but I do just he presented himself very unlikable in his comments in that Any Given Saturday, but then also just some of his comments at like Media Day and On 3, and just, I didn't go play in the Big Ten. What was his comment about the Big Ten? And I would play against really good teams or something like that.
He went on the Bussin' with the Boys podcast, and they were, because it's ran by Taylor Lewan and Will Compton, 2 Big Ten guys. And they were asking if he got any phone calls from the Big Ten, and the transfer portal is like, oh, you don't answer the phone when the Big Ten calls. This is the SEC. It's like, brother, you're at Vanderbilt.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, you're not even the real SEC. Every other SEC fan wonders when they're going to kick you guys out of the league. And I would like to remind you who won the last 2 national championships. It was a team from the Big Ten. And it was just like, dude, know your audience a little bit too. Like, know who is thinking highly enough to you to have you on their show and to say something like that to them. It was just like, okay, this kid. And then you watch even his own teammates, and it was a little bit lighthearted in this, but you could tell that lineman was like getting a little bit sick of him. Like, dude, you don't even do nothing at practice. You know what I mean? Like, you just talk trash the whole time. I'm like, yeah, okay, that tracks. That tracks. So, I mean, that stuff, it's like you're just adding fuel to your enemy, so to speak, when you conduct yourself that way.
Yeah, there's something about this offseason that middle of the road quarterbacks just kind of feel the need to talk out of their
right.
And
it's not Arch out here running his mouth. It's not DJ Lagway. It's not Garrett Nussmeier. It's not CJ Carr. It's not Bryce Underwood. It's not John Mateer. It's flipping Thomas Castellanos and Diego Pavia. It's like, seriously? You guys are the ones talking trash? You got benched for Grayson James. Pipe down. Go win a quarterback battle. Go, you know what I mean? Like go beat out the Florida State guy for the 2-10 team, and then you can come back and talk to me about, I'm the reason that they did. Well, all I know is the offense was better when they benched you. That's all I'm saying. So yeah, it's they both present themselves as very unlikable in that video.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Yeah.
They made the LSU head coach not the least likable guy in that production. Thought that was interesting. Let's get back to the predictions, Trev. Gonna go 7-11. The number 11 team for me is a team that I think could end up being better than where I have them, and that's the Auburn Tigers. I look at this Auburn team, Trev, and there's a lot I like about this football team, and they've got some good talent coming back. I think you look at how the season finished for them, and I look at that Auburn team offensively late in the year, and they started to kind of show some signs of life late in the season. You look at, they had a 507-yard performance against Louisiana Monroe. They went for 469 and 6.5 yards per play against A&M. They had 399 yards against Bama, but went for 6.1 yards per play. They were 5.6 yards per play or better in each of their last 5 games. And only one of those games were they less than 6, and that was against Vanderbilt. They were 5.6. So they showed some flashes last season of success. And I think when I look at their, what they've got coming in, I think Cam Coleman is going to be a breakout star for them this year. I know that's not a bold take because a lot of people think that. That's one of those ones where I'm going with the majority on this one because that's what the film tells me. I think getting Eric Singleton was a big pickup for them. I think Eric Singleton individually gets too much hype. Like he's some elite player. But I think complimenting Cam Coleman with Eric Singleton was masterful because they're very different players. And I think that combination is going to be outstanding, even though it's kind of like when you say a guy's overrated because you have him in the ranked in the top 5, but I think he should be more top 25. Technically, that's overrated, but it's not like I think Eric Singleton stinks. He's a very good football player. I just think when I'm watching him play and I'm watching Malachi Fields play, I'm wondering, why is this guy getting all the hype and this guy isn't? But different story for a different day. But I like their offensive line has a chance to be improved this year. I like their left tackle, but that they got in the transfer portal. I like they've got Damari Alston and Jeremiah Cobb are two up and coming running backs that were highly ranked players that I think have a shot to be solid players. Keldrick Falk's got a chance to I think he's got a chance to be a breakout player as a pass rusher. His production last year was impressive. I think he had 11 tackles for loss and 7 sacks, but his 7 sacks came in 4 games. He had 3 games of 2 and then a game of 1. So that meant that there were 8 games he didn't record a sack. And he only had 5, and all of his tackles for loss came in like 5 or 6 games. So like half the games he produced nothing. He's only a sophomore. So I think there's going to be more consistent production from him this season. I think he's got a chance to be a bit of a breakout player. They did have some portal pickups, but if you look at it, their portal pickups in a lot of instances are going to be more depth guys and a couple starters. It's not like they're completely remaking their team with portal players. And they've focused a lot on recruiting the high school level. And a lot of those guys they've recruited are now going to be stepping into the starting lineup. So they're going to be young this year, but they're going to be talented. And the key for them is going to be Jackson Arnold. If Jackson Arnold can be better than he was in the SEC last year, then Auburn is going to be better. They're going to finish higher than where I have them. I have them here because I am not bought into Jackson Arnold as like he played in this league last year and got benched for a reason. He was average, I think it was like 5.8 yards per attempt, 5.4, something like the yards per attempt. He's got to get a whole lot better for this team to take the next step, but they have weapons. And the thing that hurt Jackson Arnold last year at Oklahoma, if you're being fair, is their receiving core got devastated by injuries. So sometimes you wonder, like, was he that bad or did he just have nobody to throw to? We're going to find that out this year because he walked into a tough receiver situation, into one of the 3 or 4 best receiver situations in the SEC. And if the line can hold up, which I think they have a shot to do, I think this Auburn team could surprise some people. I think at the very least, even if they finish like 9-11, they're going to have a couple big upset wins. But with the way Hugh Freeze is as a coach, I also think they could have a couple games that they lose, and you're like, how did you beat that team but lose to that team? Like, I could see them upsetting Georgia. Like, seriously, I could see them upset Georgia on October 11th or upset Bama on November 29th, but then lose at Vanderbilt and then lose at Arkansas. Like, I could absolutely see that. The other thing that hurts Baylor this year is their schedule's not easy. At Oklahoma, at Texas A&M, at Arkansas, at Vandy, and then home games against Georgia, Missouri, and Alabama. And that's another thing that factors them down. But I'm one of the biggest locks that I have this year is that Auburn will have at least one huge upset this year. It's just, will they be consistently good? That's the big question for me. Number 10 is Tennessee. I'll just say it, Trev. I think Tennessee last year was a lot of smoke and mirrors. I do. And you look at what they lost, their offensive line took a step back with some of their losses, losing Dylan Sampson. Hurts to a degree, but I like their young running backs. I think they'll be okay there. I don't have a lot of faith in their receiving core to really get back to what they were a few years ago with Jalen Hyatt and that group that they had with him. I like Joey Garcia, or Joey Aguilar, but I think he's a good player. I don't think he's a great player. He's got to protect the ball a lot better. I think he had some big games at App State, and I like the pickup overall, but he also will force the ball, and he's going to have to limit the turnovers. But the big thing that concerns me about Tennessee, Trev, is their defense suffered a lot of blows last year, like from last year's team. They lost some really good players. I think Tim Banks did a heck of a job with that team last year. I think he was the driver of their success, but just personnel-wise, are they going to be able to get after the quarterback? Are some of the young players that are going in their second year is going to be able to take a step up? I just don't know if the defense – I still expect their defense, just so we're clear, they had some very big personnel losses. I still think their defense is the best part of their team. My question is it going to be good enough for them to win those 17-14 games like they won last year? Is it going to be good enough for them to outscore Oklahoma 25-15, beat Florida 23-17, beat Bama 24-17, beat Kentucky 28-18? Are they going to be good enough to win those games, or will some of those teams get that one extra touchdown a game because their offense is worse than it was last year? Which is possible. It really is possible. And that's really the concern for me, is I just don't know if their defense has enough firepower to win those 19-14, 21-14 games like they did last year. And I don't know that their offense is going to be a whole lot better. This is a big year for Josh Heupel, who a lot of people view as an offensive guru. And we saw that in the Hendon Hooker years, but we haven't really seen that since. And this is a year where he's going to have to try to figure out how to get that going. But and then also when you look at their schedule, Trev, it's not a cakewalk of a schedule either. It's not like the gauntlet that LSU has, but it's not easy either. It's Georgia at home, at Mississippi State, home against Arkansas, at Bama, at Kentucky, home against Oklahoma, at Florida, home against Vanderbilt. Their schedule is enough to where they could go up a couple spots based on that. But I just think the Volunteers take a little bit of a dip this year compared to last year. Certainly, so they're a playoff team last year. I don't see that this year. Number 9 for me is the Oklahoma Sooners. Look, we don't know what's going on with John Mateer right now. And so we're not going to comment on that because we haven't been able to do enough research to know what's real, what's not real. Was he really making bets? Was he just being silly and sending stupid things? I don't have a clue. And so right now we're working with the assumption that John Mateer is going to be on the team this year, because it's just right now, it's just a lot of speculation and a lot of that stuff. And we don't really get into that. So if there's something more concrete, we'll talk about it. But right now we're going to talk about John Mateer being part of this football team. And when I look at Oklahoma, Trev, the one thing that I understand a lot of the hype that Oklahoma is getting this year for one reason, and that is I think their defense is going to be very good, or at least has a chance to be very good. They have a lot of talent coming back. They have portal guys that are going into their second seasons, but they also have a lot of guys that they recruited to Oklahoma that are now becoming veterans. You've got the Bowen brothers. I think that Peyton Bowen's going to have a bounce back year this year, look more like he did as a freshman. His brother has turned into be a really outstanding player. What's funny is everybody thought Peyton was the stud, but last year Eli was the better player at cornerback, and he's coming back. I think their linebackers have a shot to be good players. Kip Lewis, Kobe McKenzie. Their D-line's got to hold up. I think it's got the tools to do so. The question for me is going to be, can their receivers stay healthy and play a whole season? You got Deion Burks coming back, who they got last year from Purdue. Very talented player, but got hurt very early in the season. Played 5 games. What did he play? He played 3, 4, 5 games last year, got hurt. Year before at Purdue, he was 47 catches, 629 yards, and 7 touchdowns. I think he's a really good player. You talked about losing Arkansas losing Isaiah Satenga. Where'd he go? He's going to Oklahoma. He transferred to Oklahoma. So they've got a shot to have a better group of pass catchers, and their running back room is going to be loaded. I love Jade Knott. I think he's a heck of a player. He was banged up last year. He's healthy. Javante Barnes is a good player. Xavier Roberts is a big old boy. Taylor Tatum is a former big-time recruit. They got in Torrey Blaylock. They have a very deep running back room, very deep. The concern I have about Oklahoma, however, is the offensive line is still a major problem. And I worry about their strength program because you don't have that many injuries just by freak accident, I don't think. If you think Notre Dame's injury problems last year were bad, it doesn't even compare to what Oklahoma went through. Notre Dame had as many injuries on their team last year, big injuries. Oklahoma had a receiver basically last year. The key to Oklahoma is going to be their offense being able to make a quick transition and the ability to get the offensive line to finally start playing competent football. That killed their offense last year. their offensive line did. If that doesn't get better, it doesn't matter you have Jaden Ott. It doesn't matter that you have your court receivers are healthy. It doesn't matter that you have John Mateer. If you can't block people in the SEC, you're going to get beat. And then when you look at Oklahoma's schedule, that's not exactly a cakewalk either. It's like they said, okay, well, we're going to bring in these two Big 12 teams, and one of them we're going to give a fluff schedule to, the other one we're going to give a gauntlet to, and they pretty much gave Texas the fluffier schedule. And this is the schedule for Oklahoma. They have Auburn at home, Texas and Dallas, at South Carolina, home against Ole Miss, at Tennessee, at Alabama, home against Missouri, home against LSU. If I was doing a power ranking, I would have Oklahoma higher than 9th. But I just don't think with the offensive line issues they have, I don't know that team can be higher than 7 to 9 with that schedule. If they had Missouri's schedule, they'd be higher on this list for me because I think their roster's a lot better than Missouri's. I just think that the O-line issues and the schedule are why I have them a little lower, Trev. Number 18 for me, South Carolina Gamecocks. I know this was a real tough one for me. There's a couple reasons why, Trev. I have some questions about their offensive line. I think their offense last year was very up and down. Their defense was good last year. I do wonder if it's repeatable what they did last season. Their offense has to be more consistent. They rely a whole lot on Lenore Sellers. The receiving core has names in it, but not proven production. Nick Harbor gets a lot of hype. Mazeo Bennett gets a lot of hype. Neither of them have really produced a whole lot. I think Rocket Sanders was a very underrated part of that team last year, and he's gone. And you have the questions on the offensive line. So I think there's some questions I have about them. I also don't know if South Carolina is a team that's capable of being consistent. Nobody expected them to be as good as they were last year. Were they a flash in the pan, or is this the new normal? And because they have such a volatile head coach, I don't know that you can assume that they're going to be a consistent program because they don't have a consistent head coach. And he's a smart guy. He's a hard worker. He's a great recruiter. There's a lot of things to like about Shane Beamer, but he's very emotional. And I've talked to people that have visited their practices and gone over, and they're like, it is a train wreck. Just not you go there and then you go to other practices and it's night and day, and not in a good way. And that's kind of who Shane Beamer is. So unless he kind of grows up a little bit as a head coach, which doesn't often happen when you're 48, I can speak from experience on that one. You kind of are what you are. I just think the lack of consistency for South Carolina is going to be a bit of an issue. And then when you look at their schedule, Trev, it's not an easy schedule, that's for sure. They open up against Virginia Tech and Georgia. They play Vandy at home. Then you're at Missouri, home against Kentucky. Seems good so far, right? Okay, then you're at LSU, home against Oklahoma, home against Alabama, at Ole Miss, at Texas A&M, and then, of course, they're home against Clemson, which is a non-conference game. But I just think the schedule and some of the volatility of that team is, despite Lenore Sellers being a great player, is why I have the Gamecocks at 8. And then number 7 for me is the Florida Gators. And this is another team that it's all dependent upon their quarterback. And right now I'm assuming that their quarterback is healthy. If he's healthy, the Gators could finish 7-5, in my opinion. They're going to be really good along both lines. They have talent at receiver, just got to keep it healthy. And they're already getting banged up in fall camp again. Dallas Wilson's missed time. Eugene Wilson has missed time. They got to get those guys healthy. If Dallas Wilson, Eugene Wilson, and J. Michael Sturdivant can be healthy all season, that's a really good group of pass catchers for Florida to throw to. Really good running back duo back there. Their offense should be a lot better, Trev, but it all is going to come down to, can DJ Lagway be healthy and have a sophomore jump? I think their defense, again, it's the same thing. Can they stay healthy? They should have a really good defensive line. Caleb Banks is an absolute monster in the middle of that defense. And their secondary is going to be healthier this year. They should be better this season. That's still the question mark for me, is the secondary. That's still my big question mark. But they were like the receiving core last year, just banged up a lot. Can they stay healthy? Can they get back on track? I don't know. Front 7 should be pretty good, but the health of DJ Lagway and the secondary are my big question marks for Florida. But if he's healthy, they have a shot to finish anywhere from 5-7 this season. If not, then it could go south.
My number 11 team, and I think they are going to be kind of the biggest fallers in terms of, like, I think their stock is going to drop the most from last season to this season. It's Tennessee for a host of different reasons. A lot of them Brian already covered. You lost a lot. I mean, we're talking about they lose SEC Offensive Player of the Year in Dylan Sampson. James Pierce is gone. They have to replace 4 offensive linemen. I'm just not sold on Joey Aguilar, if I'm being honest. He threw 14 picks against an Appalachian State schedule and is now going to be playing against teams like Georgia, Bama, Oklahoma, Florida. They went 6-2 in conference last season. I do not see them repeating that. But above all else, one of the things that makes me the most nervous about this team is, what is the locker room situation looking like? A lot of people were sold on the idea that someone like the locker room and the NIL issues were out the door with Nico. And the conversation was that this is either going to galvanize this team and they're going to band together and they're going to piece together a decent season, or it could lead to other problems. And I was under the impression that, yes, Nico is kind of the problem child in that locker room, but with stuff like money and NIL and the amount of money, it's rarely ever one person.
Right. I mean, Trev, even before Nico got there, you had the situation late in the year where a defensive player was getting in getting in Hendon Hooker's face about, all the hype he was getting. And then Joe Milton steps in and handles business, being the good backup quarterback. And this was there before Nico. And Nico being recruited the way he was is an indictment of the culture that Josh Heupel created.
Yep.
You allowed this to become the problem as the head football coach. Now you're trying to fix it. But to your point, that this has existed before Nico. Nico is just the greatest example of it, but it's not the only example of it. And hopefully he can get that turned around. I'm sorry to interject during your portion, but it frustrates me because it's been frustrating watching him build that team because he's got potential as a coach, but I don't know that he knows how to build a culture.
Well, and that's my biggest concern with them. I mean, they lost some pieces. They lost some very key pieces. I'm not sold on the galvanization of this Tennessee roster. I got to see it. Because there's been multiple examples of, after that defensive player left, that was giving Hendon Hooker a hard time. And will they step up then? Okay, well, now they got in Nico, and then that issue happened. And then we had the issue with one of the receivers, Brian, that just came out about the NIL money from Tennessee?
It was DB. Boo Carter's a DB.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so I hope that those issues go to rest because I think Tennessee is one of those programs that college football as a whole is better when Tennessee is better. They're one of those programs to me, so I hope that they can get it figured out. But as of right now, heading into this season, I have them as my 11th team in conference. My number 10 team is Auburn, and they went 2-6 last season in conference. I do have them improve this year. Love their receiving core. I'm not going to break down that too much, but my questions, are also around the quarterback situation. That, and I don't know how much I trust Hugh Freeze.
Yeah,
but their quarterback, their quarterback situation to me is a big question mark. If Jackson Arnold can get it turned around, one, there will be no excuses this time if you're throwing to Cam Coleman and Eric Singleton. But if he doesn't, because what I factor into these rankings is I want to try and do my best to looking at both sides of the coin. If Jackson Arnold pans out, I think Auburn could finish the year higher than 10. And to Brian's point, I think they're going to come away this year with at least one big upset win where you're like, whoa, did not see that coming. My biggest concern, though, is if Jackson Arnold doesn't work out, then who are you turning to? You either turn to Ashton Daniels, who's the transfer from Stanford, and we saw what he does.
He can't throw. He can't throw. He needs to play another position. He can't throw.
Exactly. Or you turn to a true freshman in Deuce Knight, who has an extremely high upside. But when you have a schedule that consists of at Oklahoma, at Texas A&M, home against Georgia, on the road against Arkansas, at Vandy, and home against Alabama for the Iron Bowl, that's not an ideal situation to truly break in an 18-year-old true freshman. So I have
especially
a lot of
raw one like Deuce.
Exactly. Somebody that would need a lot of grooming.
Right.
Yes. And then another absence from this team that not enough people are talking about. I think losing Jarquez Hunter is also a blow as well. Auburn was able to stay competitive in certain games because they were able to run the football to some degree because Peyton Thorne last year for them at quarterback was just not it. But losing Jarquez Hunter is also losing him is a big it's a big blow for them. At the top, I don't hate their defense, honestly, and who they bring back. But 9 of their 11 players in the 2 deep are either transfers or true freshmen. So it's more so the depth on the roster that make me a little bit questionable about their defensive capabilities.
The youth. Yep.
And the same could be said about the 3 deep. 9 of their 11 players in the 3 deep are also either transfers or true freshmen. And so that could work out. I'm not blind to that fact either because you have a lot of homegrown kids or players going into their second or third year in the Auburn defense to kind of help bring along some of the youth and transfer portal players. But the depth is a question mark for me on defense. My number 9 team is Ole Miss, and they were 5-3 last season. I have them a hair under that this year. I really like Austin Simmons. I think their wide receiver play takes a step back. I think Caden Lee is going to be a dude, but they're replacing guys like Trey Harris with Harrison Wallace from Penn State. I think their D-line and linebackers should be solid.
At least he doesn't have to go against Notre Dame secondary. Sorry.
That's a very good point. That is a very good point.
Sorry, I couldn't help myself.
Have to. I get Harrison Wallace's first catch in an Ole Miss uniform will be one more catch than what he had in the Orange Bowl. But I think Ole Miss's D-line and linebackers should be pretty solid. But I do have questions about their secondary. Every single projected starter in their secondary is currently a transfer portal player. Now, we've talked before on this show, when it's a position like the secondary, it's not as big of a concern as it is for like offensive line per se, when everything is made up of transfer portal players. But with that being said, when I mean every transfer portal, or when I mean every position in the secondary, I mean every position in the secondary. Field corner, boundary corner, nickel corner, field safety, boundary safety. All of them are transfers. And so if they can get them to come together and play well as a unit, I'm not going to be as concerned, but it is still a concern. I go through and I look at Ole Miss's schedule, their in-conference schedule this year. It's not, to your point about like LSU schedule or South Carolina schedule being a little difficult, it's not to that degree, but you still get LSU at home. You're on the road against Georgia. You're on the road against Oklahoma. You're home against South Carolina. And then you get Florida. They are going to be helped out by the fact that they do get Mississippi State and Kentucky on the same schedule. Both of those games are away, but having what we believe 2 bottom-tier teams in the SEC on your schedule is definitely going to help your cause. I think Austin Simmons is going to have a good year this year. And then, like I said, I think Caden Lee is also going to have a big year, but I'm going to be interested to see what they do this upcoming year without some of the impact players that they had last year. And then getting into my number 8 team, I have Oklahoma. 2-6 in conference last season. I think that they take a step up. I am confident that they will be better this upcoming season if they're able to remain healthy. Now, like you said, don't really know what's going on with the whole John Mateer situation, but if he's a part of the team, the combination of John Mateer and Jaden Ott lining up in that backfield, that might be one of the most dynamic quarterback running back duos in the SEC. I don't say that lightly, considering we know what type of player DJ Lagway can be. I'm very high on Lenore Sellers. Marcel Reed returns behind a very experienced offensive line and a host of running backs. But Jaden Ott and John Mateer could be one of the more dynamic 1-2 quarterback running back punches in this league. Be very interested to see what happens with them. For me, when I look at Oklahoma, this comes down to how competitive are you in bigger conference games? You go and look at what they did last year in 2024. They lost to Texas by 31. They lost to South Carolina by 26. They lost to Ole Miss by 12, and they lost to LSU by 20. And so it comes down to the situation of like, what's the real Oklahoma team? Are you the one that held the Alabama offense to 3 total points? Yes, I know that Jalen Milroe had issues throwing. He also had those same issues throwing against LSU, and he rushed for 4 touchdowns. And so the Oklahoma defense last year, to Brian's point, proved that they can be legitimate. But can you consistently be that? The consistency level with Oklahoma is going to be huge for them this year. But if they're able to bring it all together, I really like what they can be. Their schedule this year in conference doesn't get easier. They have Texas, South Carolina, Alabama, and LSU. But I do think that they pull off an upset on the road in conference in October. So I'm going to be interested to see how that pans out. But Oklahoma right now, they got to be able to stay healthy. But if they are, I love the pieces that they have. And so that'll be very interesting to see what they do. Number 7.
Road game in October or a neutral site game in October?
Maybe it's
I have a specific game in mind.
I do have a position game in mind, or a position game, a specific game.
I know what you meant, specific.
I do have a position game in mind, Brian. But
I'm curious. What game are you referring to?
The South Carolina game.
Oh, nice. That is a road game. I didn't know because it was either that or the A&M or the
Mhm.
Texas game in Dallas, and I was curious. Okay, ooh, I like that. Okay,
Mhm. I think that one's going to be
okay.
fun. But so my number 7 team to kind of round out this portion, I have Florida. Last season they went 4-4 in conference. I think they're going to come pretty close to repeating what they did. I do think though that Florida kind of has some of the most variance for me because of the questions of health I have about DJ Lagway. I could see them rising or falling. There are some teams on this list that when I looked at them and when I went through this conference breakdown, I was like, this is kind of the lowest I see them. Ole Miss, this is the absolute lowest that I see them. You know,
That's how I was with
Oklahoma.
Tennessee. I'm
Yep.
predicting the worst case for Tennessee this season.
Yep. Yep. Ole Miss, I'm predicting their worst case scenario. Florida, they could rise or fall either way, and neither one would surprise me. But look, at the end of the day, this is going to come down to what DJ Lagway does from a health perspective. He's already shown that he's injury prone. Excuse me. Up until he shows me that he can, I'm not confident in his abilities to show that he can finish a full season. And they need a lot from him. You know, if they are able to repeat what they did in conference last year, I think that's still a good year for Billy Napier considering what their schedule is. They're at LSU, they get Texas, they're at Texas A&M, they get Georgia, they're at Ole Miss, they play Tennessee, and that's including having out of conference games against Florida State and Miami as well. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do there. I like their offensive line. They return 89 career starts. Jake Slaughter is one of the better interior offensive linemen in the conference. They also have good experience on their front seven. I like the linebackers they have coming back. Both of their edge rushers come back. And then, like you said, the kid that's the force in the middle of their defense also returns. But Florida, I don't want to just make it about one guy, but you go and look back at the Georgia game. That's kind of a microcosm of what their season was. With DJ Lagway, that's a really effective team. Without DJ Lagway, not a lot behind it. And so I hope that he's able to stay healthy because if he is, this Florida team will probably be higher than the initial ranking that I'm giving them right now. But until I see it, that's where he's going to be.
Here's my thoughts on DJ Lagway being healthy. I think if DJ Lagway is healthy, the floor for Florida is about 8th. The ceiling is about 5th. I don't think that they're maybe 4th. I don't think they're a team that's like, contender for the league. But I will say this: if he misses a good chunk of the year, I think their floor bottoms out into the 10 or like outside of like they wouldn't be in this range. If he misses like half the year, they're not in this ranking. They're in the 12 to 16, in my opinion. Like he's that important because of what's coming up. I mean, what are you going to turn to Harrison Bailey? I don't think that's going to go well. That's a problem. All right, let's go to we're going to do 4 in the next group, and then we're going to do our final 2. I've got Ole Miss number 6, Trevin, and I had a tough time at Ole Miss. I could see Ole Miss being as low as you had them. I could see them being in the top 4. I think their ceiling is a little lower this year than it was last year because of so much turnover. They have a lot of turnover up front, a lot of turnover at wide receiver, a lot of turnover on defense. And what really, like, the offense was good last year, but it was also very inconsistent last season. What drove Ole Miss's success for a good chunk of the year, in my opinion, was the play of their defense. Their defense last year for chunks of the season was outstanding. They only gave up 14.4 points per game last year. And they lost games giving up 20 points. They lost a game giving up 29 points, and that included an overtime score. And then they gave up 24 points in a loss. Like they beat Georgia. They held Georgia to 10 points. They held Oklahoma to 14 points. South Carolina to 3 points. They held Furman, Middle Tennessee State, Wake Forest, South Carolina, all to single digits. And then, they played Duke in the postseason, held them to 20. The only team that really moved the ball on them consistently and put up a bunch of points last year in regulation was Arkansas, a game they won by 32. So I think their defense was good, but they lost a lot from that defense, Trev. And you mentioned the secondary being completely turned over, but they also lost Walter Nolan from last year. Like that team is having to turn over a lot from their defense last season. And I don't know how they're going to be able to overcome that, to be honest with you. And I think that combined with some of the question marks on the offensive side of the ball replacing, Caden Lee, I think is going to be a question mark. The big thing for them is they need Dejon Stribling from Oklahoma State to be what I think he can be. If he can have sort of the success in that system that I think he can have, they're going to end up finishing higher than what I have them. I think they're loaded at running back. They're going to be really good at running back. I feel like with Ole Miss, I have them a little bit lower than I thought I was going to have them this season. And, part of it's their schedule. Their schedule's kind of middle of the road. It's not hard. It's not easy. They get Kentucky on the road, home against Arkansas, home against LSU, but then they're at Georgia, at Oklahoma, but then they get South Carolina at home. They get Florida at home, and then they play at Mississippi State. That's not a brutal schedule, but it's not an easy one either. And it's just a lot of questions with Ole Miss. And then, Austin Simmons being a first-time quarterback, there's some teams with first-time quarterbacks that I don't think the quarterback's going to hurt them. I'm not worried about who Notre Dame's starting quarterback is going to be because of what's around them. I look at Ohio State's starting quarterback. I'm not worried about what he's going to be, Julian Sand, because of what's around him. Ty Simpson at Alabama, because of what's around him. I can't say the same for Austin Simmons because there are some question marks about what's around him. And so I think that's kind of where I look at them and say, I'm not as high on them this season as I was I wasn't that high on them last year either, but they were better than what I thought they're going to be last year. This year, I'm just too many losses on defense and at receiver for me to think that they're going to repeat. Plus, I think the teams ahead of them are pretty good. If I was predicting, I'd say if I'm wrong on Ole Miss, I think I'll be wrong in the direction of they're not as good as even I have them. I think this could be a bit of a rebuilding year for Ole Miss. I really do. Even though I do like their quarterback quite a bit, Austin Simmons. And if I'm wrong on my predicting them to be lower, it'll be because he's a beast. That'll be why. Number 5 for me is the LSU Tigers. I had a tough time with LSU because I have LSU 5. I could see LSU finishing lower than this. I told you that with Tennessee, I gave Tennessee the worst case scenario. With LSU, I'm going kind of with a little bit of best case scenario. They play Florida at home. They play South Carolina at home. They play Texas A&M at home, Arkansas at home. They've got to hold serve at home, and they haven't really been able to do that under Brian Kelly as much as they should, honestly. And he had a lot of success at home at Notre Dame. But, last year LSU got blown out at home by Alabama. In his first year at LSU, they got blown out at home by Tennessee. If you remember that game, giving up 40 points, scoring 13. They held serve at home in 2023 because their home schedule was pretty soft, but they almost got beat by Arkansas at home 2 years ago, if you remember that, Trev. And then I look at just this year, the road contest for them. Ole Miss on the road, Vandy on the road, Alabama on the road, Oklahoma on the road. If LSU's not 5th, I could see them being lower. I really could. I just have a hard time when I look at a rebuild defensive line, a rebuilt offensive line. Their receivers are going to be very good, but they're always very good. Combined with one of the tougher schedules in the SEC is really why this isn't a shot at Brian Kelly. There's too many question marks in the trenches, and that schedule is brutal. That's why I just have a tough time seeing LSU being higher than 5th. I think their ceiling is probably 4th, at best 3rd for me, just because of the schedule. If they had Tennessee schedule, Missouri schedule, I think you could make a case for LSU being 2 to 3 in the SEC this year. But their schedule is just, it's really rough. I'm going to say that Florida, at Ole Miss, home against South Carolina, at Vandy, home against Texas A&M, at Bama, home against Arkansas, at Oklahoma. I think that's a really tough schedule. I do. I think it's a really tough schedule. And I think it's going to keep them out, which means if they're 5-3 in the league, they better have a win over Clemson in the non-conference. I could see a world in which, and we'll talk about this more on Saturday, but I could see a world in which Ole Miss or against where LSU can lose 3 conference games. Let's say they lose at home in a barn burner to A&M. Let's say they get beat at Ole Miss and lose to Alabama, where if they have wins at Oklahoma, wins at Clemson, win over Florida, that you could be saying they have a much better 9-3 case for the playoffs than what Alabama and Ole Miss had last year because of their schedule. So that's why that first game is going to be so important in my opinion, because they're in conference. If they lose that game to Clemson, it's going to be hard for them to have less than 2 losses in their league play. So that's why I have the Tigers 5th. And the camp injury, it's not long term, but it's a little bit of worry with Garrett Nussmeier for me. Number 4 is the Texas A&M Aggies. Trev, I'm a lot higher on Texas A&M this year than a lot of people seem to be, and I think it's the reasons why. It's the year 2 effect for Mike Elko. I think he's a darn good football coach. And the other thing too is you hear me say a lot. What's a primary concern for a lot of the teams that I have concerns about? It's the trenches. And when I look at Texas A&M, I think they're going to be trenches, especially on the offensive side of the ball. They have one of the best returning offensive lines in the country. They have a great backfield coming back. The receiving core now fits more of what Colin Klein likes. He does. Last year had those big guys he inherited. That's not what his system requires. He wants quickness and speed, and that's what he has now. I think their offense should be a lot better now. I think Marcel Reed's a solid player, but he's a great fit for that system. But he won't have to be counted on as much to carry that team as much as he did this year. And I don't think their defense takes a step back that some people think that they do. I think they had they're not going to be as physically gifted on the D-line this year, but I'm willing to bet you a steak dinner, Trevor, that their defensive line is actually going to be more steady this year than it was last year. Maybe not as sexy, won't be as flashy, but just more steady. Where that D-line last year was incredible, and there was other games where I didn't think that D-line wanted to be there. And I think this D-line is going to be a little bit grittier, a little bit hungrier, a little bit more consistent, and I love their linebackers and their secondary. I do. I think Will Lee is a heck of a player. They've got one of the better returning linebacker duos in the country with Torian York and I'm completely drawing a blank. Scooby Williams. I kept wanting to say Solomon Williams, but he plays for another SEC team. Scooby Williams. I think they're outstanding players, and I like this football team, and their schedule's challenging, but it's challenging in a way that I think works well for them. They get Auburn at home, they get Florida at home, they get South Carolina at home. They do have to play at Texas, they have to play at LSU, but their other 2 road games are very winnable games for them, at Arkansas and at Missouri. So you could see them lose to at LSU and at Texas and then beat Auburn at home, beat Mississippi State at home, beat Florida at home, beat South Carolina at home, beat Missouri at home, and beat Arkansas at home, or on the road, I should say. So I just think it's a tough schedule, but it's not like brutal. And I just think this A&M team is a lot steadier than maybe people are giving them credit for. So that's why I have them number 4. And then number 3, Trev, because this is going to give away who's going to be in my top 2, the Texas Longhorns. I get that they're the chic team, right? They're the trendy pick. They're the team that everybody loves, and there's reasons for it. Steve Sarkisian's an offensive genius. He absolutely is. Arch Manning's a very talented player. They have very talented receivers, but they are counting on a lot of young players this season on defense, on offense. They've got major question marks on the offensive line to me. They've got legit questions on the defensive line outside of Colin Simmons. Their secondary is talented, but has some important pieces that need to step up. I think Texas is very good. I just think that people are putting a little bit too much on them this season. And then when you look at their schedule, they've got to play at Florida. They've got to play Oklahoma on a neutral field. They've got to play at Georgia. And then you've got a home game against Texas A&M. I just think when I look at this team, I think there's a chance for 2 losses on their schedule this year in the regular season. I do. And I could be wrong about that, but I'm not as high on Texas as other people are. I'm good with Texas being ranked in the top 5 preseason, but because of what they've done and the talent, Sark and all that. But I think they're going to stub their toe a couple times. And what that's going to do, here's my long-term prediction though. What that's going to do is that means a lot of guys that may go pro are going to come back in 2026. And that's when I think Texas is going to, like, the hype that Texas is getting now is what I think they would deserve next season after a bit of a step back year, because all those young players, Wingo's now a junior, Emmett Mosey's now a junior. Their line's going to have a lot of guys coming back next year. Colin Simmons is going into his junior year. I think that's the team that's going to be more dangerous in 2026, not this team. And that's why but this team is still going to be good, Trev. I still have them 3rd. And then Yeah, that's my 3-6.
My number 6 team, I went with their floor, and I have the Texas A&M Aggies. There's a lot of things that I love about this team. Outside of just the fact that they're on Notre Dame's schedule, it's year 2 of the Mike Elko era. 3 of their last 4 conference games are tough. At LSU, South Carolina, at Texas, and then with a road game against Missouri sprinkled in there as well. But I love the potential of what their offense could be heading into year 2 of the Colin Klein era. To Brian's point, I think their wide receivers fit what they want to do more. They have a very experienced offensive line coming back. They have 120 combined career starts. I think they have the best running back room in the SEC. They have one of the best in the country. Marcel Reed had a full offseason to prep as the starter. I do think he's key. Where I do agree with you, Brian, I don't think that he's going to have to put the team on his shoulders again like he did last season, but I do still think the offense will still have to run through him. It just won't look like what it did last year.
He doesn't need to be a star. He just needs to not make the big mistakes and get the ball to his playmakers and then use your legs to make some plays. He doesn't have to be, Vince Young. He doesn't have to be,
Sure.
Like he can be like sort of a different style, but like what Will Howard was last year for Ohio State, where he didn't have to be a star, but I'm talking in a regular season. Just get the ball where it's supposed to go to, and don't turn it over. And then when your legs or opportunities for your legs are there, use them.
Yep. Absolutely. It's just can Marcel Reed kind of build off of some of his successes from last year, because there were moments in games and there were some games where he performed really well, but overall as a starting quarterback at Texas A&M, he's like 1-5. And so it's who's the real Marcel Reed? Is it the flashes in the pan that we saw against LSU? But again, that win over LSU, that 15-point win, he threw 2 passes. So that's interesting. It's interesting to see where he's going to fall, what he's going to look like. But at the end of the season, they lose by 24 points to South Carolina. They lost to Auburn in 4 overtimes. They only scored 1 offensive touchdown against Texas. He's going to have to do a better job of taking care of the football down the stretch. He had 6 interceptions last season, and all 6 of them came in the last 5 games. And so I think some of those numbers will naturally decrease since he won't be asked to be the Superman in that offense. But still a piece of me that has to see it. I'm confident in the pieces that they have. But
although I don't blame him for why they lost to Auburn. That wasn't on him.
No, that wasn't.
The offense did their part. The defense
when you score 41 offensive points, you should probably walk away with a dub. I agree completely. I think their success, though, and I don't think their defense is going to take as big of a step back as what people think, but they need to find a way to play more consistently on defense. And that's consistent through the entire year. I mean, you go back through and you look at what Texas A&M did last year, especially down the stretch. They hold LSU to 23 points. They win by 15, but then you give up 44 the next week to South Carolina. Then you hold New Mexico State to 3 points, and then you give up 43 to Auburn. Yes, you lost to Texas. That's not really on the defense. The defense held them to 17 points at home. And then in the bowl game against USC, they give up 35 points.
That's my point. Their defense was schizophrenic last year because I just think there were some weeks the D-line just didn't care. Like Shamar Stewart and Shamar Turner. Nick
Stewart
Scorton wasn't as dominant last year as he should have been. There just were weeks where you're like, dude, they have talent, but I have no clue what they're doing. No clue what they're doing.
Agreed completely. And a lot of their success, I think, is going to come down to what other cornerback steps up alongside Will Lee. Love their linebackers with Scooby Williams and Torian York. I think their D-line is going to play with a much more consistent motor this upcoming season than kind of the flashy, sexy, NFL draft pick players that they had last year, where it's like, hey, if they're just not feeling it this week, they're just not feeling it. Yeah. But if somebody else can step up alongside Will Lee, as long as one of Julian Humphrey or Des Rick steps up, then I think this defense is going to be just fine. I like the safeties that they have coming back. It's a solid group, but that's what it comes down to for me for Texas A&M. Number 5 is LSU, and I have LSU and Texas A&M separated by 1 game this year that I could see going either way, and it's because they face each other. But LSU last season in conference went 5-3. I have them a smidge better, but I did the same thing as Brian. I went with kind of best case scenario. I wanted to stay consistent with how I've been talking about LSU this offseason. when we did our post-spring rankings, I kind of went with best case scenario for LSU. I'm staying on track with that now for the conference rankings. On offense, are they going to be able to run the football? That's what it comes down to. Like Garrett Nussmeier, he's going to be a gunslinger. He's going to turn the football over. Has to get a little bit more consistent with like physical pressure in his face. That's going to be tough to do with a rebuild offensive line. But when I look at this offense, they're going to have to find some way to run the football. They were number 107 in the country last year in yards per game with 116.38 yards per game. And they were number 84 in the country in yards per carry at 4.06. I like Caden Durham, but he's going to have to perform and start to live up to expectations a little bit, and so is the offensive line. Completely rebuild offensive line. That's going to be interesting to see what they do. I like the individual pieces on their receiving core and what they have coming back. I think they may be putting a little bit too much emphasis on the transfers, but hopefully they're able to, one, remain healthy. You know, Nick Anderson had a season-ending injury last year. Hopefully he's able to come back healthy. But their receiving core, for me, it's not as big of a concern. I like the skill talent
They're
there.
always good there. They were good there last year when they lost 4 games. They were good there the year before that when they were elite there, and when they lost 3 games in 22 and 23. Like
Exactly. And so the biggest question for LSU, especially with who they have on their schedule this year, can the defense finally learn how to defend against mobile quarterbacks? When I look at their schedule, they struggled against mobile quarterbacks last season, and it does not get easier this year. They play Florida, South Carolina, Vanderbilt, Texas A&M, Arkansas, and Ole Miss. If they haven't figured out by now how to defend a mobile quarterback, it's going to be another long season for them.
It's going to be a long year. Yes.
Because it's just like that. And as crazy as it is to sound, like that's kind of what has been their Achilles heel. Yeah. You know, I mean, it's if they're
able crazy because they practiced against an elite mobile quarterback for like 2 years.
It had to have just been something like, we're not going to face anybody as good as Jaden.
Could you imagine what he was like in practice against this defense in 22 and 23?
I can only imagine. I can only imagine. I bet it was absolutely
a great observation, though, Trevor, about their inability to stop mobile quarterbacks and then what their schedule looks like this year. Tremendous point.
It's just that's what makes me nervous for them, because even if they figure out a way to run the football, even if their receivers pan out and their offensive line pans out and Garrett Nussmeier does a better job of taking care of the football, I don't know if I trust that unit enough to win a shootout week after week after week after week if they can't stop mobile quarterbacks. So LSU is my number 5 team. My number 4 team is South Carolina. Again, consistent with who I believe the offensive player of the year is going to be in that conference as well, with Lenora Sellers. A lot of the questions are valid, but I love how they ended last season. They ended the regular season last year on a 6-game win streak with wins over Oklahoma on the road, Texas A&M, Missouri, and then on the road against Clemson in what was honestly one of the uglier college football games of last season, but walked away with a win against a ranked opponent that went on to go and win the ACC. So I take that into consideration as well. Like I said, Lenore Sellers is my offensive player of the year in the conference. He's a lethal dual threat player, but I also agree with Brian. It comes down to his health. It wouldn't be right for me to talk about Florida's season hangs in the balance of the health of DJ Lagway, but you know, Lenore Sellers is going to be just fine. Because of his play style, it's a little bit more intriguing to see if he's going to stay healthy. One of the positives, though, is after that injury, it took him a couple games to kind of get back to true form, but he then remained healthy for the rest of the regular season, was a big part of their turnaround, and I haven't heard anything in comparison to what we've heard about DJ Lagway this offseason as far as injuries go, but they do have a tough schedule where he is going to have to find a way to stay healthy. I mean, they get at Missouri, they're at LSU, they get Oklahoma, they get Alabama, they're on the road against Ole Miss and on the road against Texas A&M. So they're going to be facing some pretty good defenses as well. But yeah, I'm with you. Nick Harbor's an interesting player to talk about. He's going to have to break out this year. All of the physical specs are off the charts. People are talking about how he runs a sub 4.3 and he's 6'5" and he's almost 240 pounds. Well, that's fantastic, but that now has to turn into production. I think there was also a reason why their tight end was their leading receiver last season, and it wasn't Nick Harbor. So he's going to have to step up in this offense to be what he is kind of being hyped up to be. And then Can they replace a big piece of what they lost on defense? I think Dylan Stewart is going to be a dude, like what we talked about for your defensive player of the year. I agree completely. And I think the two obvious choices in the SEC conference is Colin Simmons and Dylan Stewart. On the flip side, however, of what you were talking about, what is Dylan Stewart going to be able to do now that he isn't lining up opposite of Kyle Kennard? That is going. I'm going to be
Brian
interested
Thomas
to see how
is going to
he
have to
yes.
step up. Yeah, for sure.
Yes. Brian Thomas is going to have to be that guy. Not Brian Thomas doesn't have to be Kyle Kennard. Brian Thomas just has to be what Dylan Stewart was last year as a true freshman to take some pressure off of him. Because we've seen teams before in the past be able to key in on one specific guy. We saw it in 2022 with Isaiah Foskey at Notre Dame. When the offensive line in a blocking scheme can just focus on one person, it makes it a much more effective operation. And so that's my only question about Dylan Stewart, but I think he as a player is a dog. But I'm going to be interested to see what the strategy is to replace Kyle Kennard. But South Carolina is another one of those teams that I took the ceiling of what they can be. I don't see them going higher than fourth. Some of that is just because of the teams in front of them, but that's where I have South Carolina. My number 3 team is Georgia, which again kind of gives away who my 1 and 2 teams are. Not the order, but still. Georgia last season in conference, they went 6-2. I see them repeating that this year. It's interesting because they have a lot of similar opponents that they had on the schedule last season, but I think they have a more favorable schedule in terms of the quality of the teams that they're going to be playing, because I don't think Tennessee is going to be at the same level of what they were. I don't think Ole Miss is going to be the same level of what they were last year. Here's the question with Georgia. Since they have a more favorable schedule, but I do think they have less talent on the roster this season, specifically on defense, than they did last season, which one takes the day? Is it the schedule or is it the less talent on the overall roster? That's going to be something I'm really interested to follow as this season goes along. They still have Tennessee, Bama, Ole Miss, Florida, Texas, but their out-of-conference schedule is a little bit more favorable. They don't have Clemson. And now they beat the brakes out of Clemson last year, but they don't have that Clemson-level opponent in the out-of-conference this upcoming season. Can Gunnar Stockton be what Kirby Smart thinks that he can be? I think that he can be, because he's the style of quarterback that Kirby Smart has won with before in the past. Jake Fromm, Stetson Bennett, players like that. He's more along the lines of them than he was Carson Beck or Jacob Eason or Justin Fields, who ended up transferring. And so that's going to be big for Georgia this year. Can they get back to running the football? Excuse me. Can they be a vintage Georgia running the football team? Can they get back to having vintage offensive line play? That's going to be huge for them, for their offensive success. And then their receiving core, to be honest with you, I don't really see it getting much worse than it was last year, considering they led all of college football in drops last year. That is something that I'll be paying attention to. They're going to have some guys step up. Zachariah Branch is going to have to be essentially what his recruiting and transfer portal ranking is, not just the name. It's time now. You're going into your junior year of college. It's time to be that guy that you were expected to be back in 2023. But again, my biggest question with this team is still defense. Can they replace what they lost on defense? I think that question is overlooked by the fact that they return guys like KJ Bolden and CJ Allen, but they still lost Malachi Starks, Jalen Walker, Smell Munden, Chaz Chambliss, Nazir Stackhouse, Damon Wilson, Dan Jackson. They lost a lot of pieces from that defense from last year. And I think that's going to start to show up because Georgia can't walk into some of these conference games anymore and just say, hey, we just have the better roster. Now, where I put a lot of weight into them is they still have Kirby Smart, and I think that he is one of the best coaches, active coaches in college football right now. And so can he get this unit to perform above what they have on their roster? And I don't want to paint this picture like they have like a terrible roster. It's not bad. I think they're going to be the third best team in the SEC for a reason. It's just not what we're used to seeing from a Georgia roster. So that's why I have them at number 3.
It's interesting, Trevor, as we get ready to reveal our final 2, how much different my perception of teams when I look at their rosters compared to other teams changes when you have to factor in who they play and where they play. I would have told you before the year that there's no way I'm going to have Georgia in my SEC championship game. Just no way, because I don't think they have one of the two best rosters. But then you break down the schedule, to your point, and you look at it and realize, like, okay, their schedule is favorable. It's tough. Don't get me wrong. It's a very tough schedule. But for a team like Georgia, when you get those games at home, they're more often than not going to be wins. And because I don't see Tennessee as being as good as they were last year. So your three toughest games you get at home and in your conference, which is very interesting. And that's where I'll begin. My championship game matchup is Bama, Georgia, which will be a rematch that I have Georgia winning in the regular season, actually. So that is one of Bama's losses this year, is I have them losing to Georgia. Here's my thing on Georgia. I do think that their receiver play is going to be better. I don't know if it's going to be as better as people think. I don't think that their offensive line is going to be that much better than it was last year, but it as far as dominance, but I think it'll be more consistent as long as it's healthy. Part of the issue they had last year was just the lineup was constantly changing. And defensively, they're still going to be very good on the defensive line. They're just not going to be elite like they've been in the past. Love their linebacker room. Dalen Everett has a chance to be a stud player. You know, you lose Malachi Starks, you insert KJ Bolden, you're going to be okay. My bigger question is the other safety and replacing Dan Jackson, and how do they do that? And then, of course, they're going to have to upgrade over Daniel Harris. But I like this Georgia team. I just don't love this Georgia team like they have in the past. They're still a very good top 10 team. But when I look at their question marks compared to others, it really comes down to, I think their line play is still going to be good. I think Gunnar Stockton is the key for me. I think Gunnar Stockton is not going to turn the ball over as much as Carson Beck did in some very key situations. And I think he better fits what they want to be, or what they not want to be, what they need to be offensively. And Mike Bobo last year kept trying to be Todd Monken, and he's not Todd Monken. He needs to be a guy who has a team that runs the football and then builds the offense around the ability to run the football. And I think they're going to try to do that more. If the offensive line can be more consistent, I think they'll be okay in that regard. And then, of course, you're going to see the offense built around Gunnar Stockton more this year than it was last year, because last year he was running the Carson Beck offense. Now it's going to be the entire offseason of being built around him. And I think that's going to benefit them. And their defense is still going to be very good. I don't think it's dominant it's been in the past, but it's going to be very good. But the SEC is going to have to prove to me they can go into Athens and beat Georgia. That's the problem. Like, Alabama needed to hang on for dear life to beat Georgia last year in Tuscaloosa. I don't have a lot of faith that Ole Miss is going to be able to go into Athens and beat them. And I don't have a lot of faith that Texas couldn't beat them in Austin or Atlanta last year. They got to prove to me that they can beat Georgia toe-to-toe. Is Texas capable, talent-wise, of going into Athens and beating Georgia? Of course. But they've got to prove to me that they are physical enough and tough enough physically and mentally to play Georgia, because last year they showed me that they weren't. And so that's something that I think they need to see. And then when you look at their non-conference games, or they played Florida in Jacksonville. That's a series they've dominated lately. And they play at Tennessee, who I just got done saying, I don't think they're going to be very good this year. So I think the schedule, I texted this to you before we got started, Trevor. The rest of their schedule is home against Kentucky, at Auburn, at Mississippi State. That's the rest of their conference schedule. I said to you, as I study it and look through it, like really dive into it, it's like, I don't think their schedule is as tough as I thought it was. Because I just look at the teams, Bama, Texas, Ole Miss, and it's like, yeah, but they get them all at home. So I'm not sure how that was going to pan out. So I don't think that I think their schedule's more favorable than Texas is by a little bit at the top. And that's why I have Georgia. I think Texas has probably the better team, but their schedule's a tad tougher based on home versus away, and the fact that Texas has to prove to me they can actually beat Georgia. So if Texas and Georgia have the same record and Georgia wins in Athens, then Georgia gets the tiebreaker and they're in the conference title game. That's how I see it. And then my number one team is Alabama. Trev, I've been on the Alabama sort of bounce back hype train for a while now. You know that. There's a lot of reasons for it. I think there was some addition by subtraction this offseason with guys who weren't bought into what they're trying to do. A huge addition is getting Ryan Grubbs back. I think that was big. I love the Isaiah Horton pickup. Their offensive line should be one of the 10 best in college football. We can debate, are they top 3 or are they top 7 or 8? Either way, that's still really good. I think they're going to be good there. Their defense late in the year last year got a lot better. And this is going to be a big key for Alabama was their defense under Kane Womack, did they just get better or did they just not play any good offenses? Obviously they struggled a little bit against LSU. Not against LSU. Against Auburn, they gave up 399 points or yards and 6.1 yards per play, but only gave up 14 points in that game. They shut out Missouri. They dominated LSU. They dominated Mercer, as they should. Their defense only gave up 325 yards to Oklahoma, but 257 of it were rushing yards. And then Michigan only had 190 yards and 2.9 yards per play. They didn't lose that game because of their defense. I also look at that and say there weren't a whole lot of good offenses they played either. So I'm still a little shaky on just how good is their defense. It's getting a ton of hype. Great D-line, great linebackers, great secondary. It should be good in all those places. I don't know if it's elite, and that's going to determine. I'm banking on at least one of those positions being elite and then the other two being pretty good. And I also think that year 2 of Kalen DeBoer learning this roster and the roster learning him are factors why I see Alabama being a better team. And then when you look at it, the final piece is the quarterback. Is Jalen Milroe more talented than Ty Simpson? By 1,000 miles. Was Jalen Milroe a bad fit for this offense? Absolutely. And I think Ty Simpson is a much better fit. He's a coach's kid. I've said it before. Coach's kid. He's accurate. He's got a nice arm. He's a solid athlete. He's a gamer. He reminds me a little bit in body type and style of play of Stetson Bennett. Not an elite player, but he's going to get the ball where it needs to go to. And that's what Stetson Bennett did. He wasn't like this elite talent that could do for Georgia what Trevor Lawrence did in 2019 against Ohio State, where he's just like, okay, guys dropping balls, can't get open, can't run the ball, fine, I'm going to do it by myself. I just think of like that scene in what was it? Oh gosh, what movie was it? But where Thanos grabs the gauntlet, he's like, I'm fine, I'm gonna do this myself. You know what I mean? Like that's what Trevor had to do. Ty Simpson won't have to do that. If Ty Simpson falters, and I'm not predicting he will, you're turning to either Austin Mack or Keelan Russell, who are way more physically gifted. There's a reason Ty Simpson won this battle, Trevor, and it's because Kalen DeBoer is looking for a point guard. He's saying, I've got an elite receiving core. I've got a very good offensive line coming back, and we've got a defense that can shut people down. I need a quarterback that's not going to get us beat, and he's going to get the ball to the playmakers. They're not going to look like 2023 Washington. They're going to look like a team that's going to control the trenches and get the ball to the skill players from a design standpoint, and then the quarterback's got to read it and hit it. And I think that's what they're going to do. They're the most balanced team in the SEC this year. They're the team, in my opinion, that has the fewest holes in the SEC this year. And that's why I think Alabama is going to, in fact, be the best team in the SEC this year. Their schedule is got some challenging games in it. Obviously, at South Carolina won't be easy. At Georgia won't be easy. At Missouri won't be easy. I think they win it. And then they've got home games against Tennessee and LSU and Oklahoma. That's not an easy schedule, but it's also not a brutal schedule either. There's no Texas on their schedule. There's no Texas A&M on their schedule. There's no Ole Miss on their schedule. And of course, they're at Auburn at the end of the year. And I just think it's a manageable schedule for this team. And I feel really sorry for Vanderbilt because I just have a feeling that it's going to be some major payback in that game this year. And they're going to, I think, beat Vanderbilt pretty good. But I like this team, Trevor. I think last year was an anomaly. Kalen DeBoer did not forget how to coach football. I just think it's one of those years where you were replacing a legend. There were some players on that team who didn't want to buy into what you were trying to do because it wasn't what the legend wanted to do. Those guys are mostly gone now. Anyone who wasn't bought in would have transferred or gone pro. And so I just think this Bama team's going to be a lot better than they were last year. And like I said, part of it's my opinion of Kalen DeBoer based on what he's done everywhere he's been. And I think we're going to see that again this year. And I also think the fit at the quarterback. So this is why Bama is my number one seed. And they are my conference champion because I have them beating Georgia in a rematch. I have Georgia winning the regular season game in Athens, and then I have Bama winning the rematch. So that's my conference championship prediction for the SEC.
My conference championship prediction, and I'm sure by process of elimination, you guys figured it out. I have number 2 Texas versus number 1 Alabama. I had a really hard time when I was breaking down Texas because there's been so much talk about how good this team is, and they have the best quarterback room and the best receiver room and the best O-line and the best D-line and the best linebacker room and the best coach and the best secondary. And it was really hard for me to kind of take off the fan hat and just kind of pick apart Texas completely and be like, I know that they're not going to be this good. How good actually is Texas? And when I look at Texas, one, I look at their schedule. We've talked about it throughout this show. I think Texas is going to be significantly helped out by what their schedule is. There's no Alabama. There's no LSU. There's no South Carolina. They also get Vanderbilt, Mississippi State, and Kentucky on their conference schedule as well. They do still have on the road in Athens. They still have Florida in the Swamp, and they do still get Texas A&M at home at the end of the season. And so it is not a cupcake schedule by any means, but when you don't have what we believe to be, 3 of the top 5 to 6 teams in the SEC on your schedule, that's pretty favorable, if you ask me. You still get Oklahoma and the Red River, so that one will be an interesting game as well. That's one that Texas has kind of held its own in recent years over, course of about a decade. Rivalry games are also just a little bit different, but when I look at Texas, I want to really evaluate the pieces that they have and their talent. The ceiling of the talent that they have is really promising. To Brian's point about maybe some of the hype that they're getting in the 25 season really should be geared more towards the 26 season. But I do like Steve Sarkisian as the head coach. I don't think he's the second best coach in college football like what some people make him out to be, but I do think that he's still a heck of a coach. And a coach that I think can do a good amount with a certain level of talent. The questions that I have, one is the obvious one. We can get it out of the way. Can Arch Manning be that guy? And when I mean be that guy, I don't mean be the guy that the media outlets are making him out to be. I don't mean can Arch Manning be the best quarterback in college football history? Can he be the next whoever, insert player here? Can he be better than Quinn Ewers? I think that's a valid conversation because Quinn Ewers was kind of what held them back in certain games last season. Can he be better than that? Can he be a solid first-year starter? Can Arch Manning be to Texas what C.J. Carr or Kenny Minchey can be to Notre Dame? Can he be what Ty Simpson is going to be to Alabama? Can he be what Julian Sayin is to Ohio State? I think those are very valid questions. Their offensive line is really an intriguing conversation for me because I think that's going to hold the key to success for Texas's offense. I think it could go one of two ways. I think the amount of what they have to replace could be a little bit too much to overcome. But on the flip side, could they also make the jump that Notre Dame's offensive line did from 23 to 24? You're replacing it with new people. Notre Dame's offensive line returned returned basically 6 combined career starts. They lost Joe Alt and Blake Fisher, a first and second round NFL draft pick. That's a similar situation to what Texas has going on right now, especially after losing Kelvin Banks. Can they play more cohesively as a unit and fall more in line with what we believe Texas A&M's D-line is going to do this upcoming season with losing some of its star talent and do what Notre Dame's offensive line did from 23 to 24? Or does the volume of their replacements kind of weigh them down a little bit? Be very interested to see what happens there. To be honest with you, I'm not crazy worried about their front 7 on defense. I don't see them taking a major step back. I have questions about their secondary being able to replace Jahdae Barron and Andrew Makuba. I think it's just a little bit too much of a cop-out to say, well, there you have Malik Muhammad. They're going to be just fine. It's like, just fine? I mean, yeah, you return Michael Taffy and Malik Muhammad, but losing Andrew Makuba and Jahdae Barron are pretty big losses. So I don't know if they'll be just fine. But I think as the season goes on and those inexperienced players start to get their feet under them a little bit more, I view Texas as being one of those teams that you don't want to play as the season progresses. And the more experience that a lot of these starters get, I think is going to bode well for them. So I have them as my number 2 team. And then for all of the reasons that Brian talked about, I have Alabama as my number 1. Year 2 of the DeBoer era, I think, is going to be huge. That's why he's both of our coaches of the year. They have an experienced offensive line. They return 84 career starts. They officially named Ty Simpson as the starter, I think, yesterday. He's a better fit for the offense. Ryan Grubbs is a great fit coming back. They have the best receiving core in the conference with Ryan Williams, Isaiah Horton, Jeremy Bernard. Biggest question for me on offense is, are they going to be able to run the football? Their rushing offense last year was Jalen Milroe. Is that going to benefit them? Or is that going to put them in a spot where it's like, okay, what are you going to do from a run game perspective? Because I think that they lost their better running back to the transfer portal in Justice Haynes. Jam Miller is a good back. Is he going to be a good 3-down running back with not a mobile quarterback to kind of help support him? That I'm not sure of. I don't think it's going to completely derail the offense if they're not rushing,
especially since that's not what.
Game.
Yeah, I mean, like Washington made the championship game 2 years ago, averaging like less than $120, I think, rushing yards per game. 2023 they averaged 118.4 yards per game and played for the title.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. But some other questions that I have, the great point. I think this receiving core is very comparable to the Washington receiving core that they had with Jalen Polk and Rome Odunze and some of those pieces. But I don't know what Ty Simpson is going to do in comparison to what Michael Penix did for that team. I don't know if they're going to put up comparable numbers. And I do think in a league like the SEC, you have to be able to run the football to some degree. And so that's my one question mark for them on offense. Again, to both of our points, they don't have to rush for 200 yards a game. I'm just going to be interested to see what their rushing offense looks like without Jalen Milroe and now Justice Haynes, who I believe to be the better of the two. The defense, it just comes down to consistency. This does not have to be a vintage Alabama defense for them to win the SEC. I truly don't believe that. It doesn't have to be the 2012 Alabama defense. It doesn't have to be the 2020 Alabama defense. But you have to find some level of consistency. Last season they gave up 34 to Georgia, 40 to Vandy, 24 to a dormant Tennessee offense, and 24 to Oklahoma. But then on the flip side, they also only allowed 13 points to LSU, 10 to Wisconsin. They shut out Missouri, and they held Auburn to 14 points. And so can you find some level of consistency between getting 30 to 40 balled and shutting teams out? What can that defense do in the second year under this new regime? That I'm interested to see. But overall, Brian, you and I see that the same. I think that Alabama has the most – I think they have the less amount of holes to fill in comparison to the other teams in the league. And I also have Alabama winning the SEC as well.
It's going to be a very interesting year, Trev, because I could see 3 to 4 teams winning the SEC. 3 teams that we have at the top. I think there's a very clear top 3. I think Alabama, Texas, and Georgia are head and shoulders above everybody else in the SEC, in my opinion. And I don't know that like where they are. If like I see a drop off. However, with the way the SEC is, there's always that team that kind of can sneak out of nowhere and have that breakout year that surprise you. And all you got to do is get into the dance, and with the schedule imbalance the way that it is now compared to the past years, where in the past it was every SEC West team had a tough schedule. Everyone, because you had to play Bama. And if you were Bama, you had to play LSU, you had to play A&M, you had to play Ole Miss, you had to play Mississippi State when they were good under Dan Mullen. You had to play those teams. You had to play Auburn every year. Now it's not quite the same. You may have years where this team has a tough schedule, this team has an easier schedule, and it kind of goes that way. So those are things that I look at and view as what makes the SEC, I think, potentially really entertaining this year. But I do think there's 3 teams at the top that are going to be the best. But I think I think of all the leagues, the Big 12 and the SEC are the 2 where I think the predictions could be the most off because of the variance in schedule and there's so many question marks at key positions, offensive line, defensive line, quarterback in this league. It's going to make it very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, very interesting.
It's going to be a fun year, that is for sure. And I think the SEC is going to be right in the middle of that discussion because the level of play down there I expect to be a little bit higher than what it was from a season ago. But listen, folks, that's going to do it for us here today on the Irish Breakdown podcast. Really good discussion today surrounding the SEC. We are going to continue and pick back up with the conference breakdowns on Thursday. Tomorrow we have Buy, Sell, Hold with Brian, and I'll be back to answer your questions. The thread's already up on the message boards. See it scrolling down there at the bottom of the screen. So make sure to get your Buy, Sell, Hold submissions in. Before you guys head out of here, please be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, and share this podcast with your friends and family. Anybody that you know loves Notre Dame and college football as much as you do. Whatever streaming platform you listen to us on, we would greatly appreciate a 5-star review. But as always, the best way to support what we do here, subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Be sure here in about an hour, the guys go live on IB Nation Sports Beat. They're going to be talking some wide receiver talk, which I know has been a hot topic of discussion this offseason. So be sure to hop over and check them out as well. Until tomorrow, that's Brian. I'm Trevor. We'll see you back here very soon on the Irish Breakdown podcast.